attempting to give Adam Crea's talk. And for the bioinformaticians in the room, this may feel a bit like us MDs feel watching like Grey's Anatomy, you know, when there's like all this completely unrealistic medicine going on and everyone's sleeping with everyone and you're like, what is this? So bear with me. Okay, so basically, NGS panels have really been an important part of clinical medicine as it evolves. And one of the things that they've been used for is to select drug therapies. This study very nicely kind of showed that when there was a match between a genomic feature and the drug being used, there was a not insignificant, but real increase in survival. And so it's sort of an early indicator that molecularly targeted therapies do have a role. However, not always. So looking at BRAF inhibitors in BRAF V600E mutated melanomas, you see that waterfall plot on the left, and you know that's great. That's a big step forward for treatment of those patients. But on the right, you see CRC patients, colorectal carcinomas, where the BRAF V600E mutation really does not predict. So genomics alone is not enough. That is the theme of this slide. And so when we look at this study, which basically looked at prediction of sensitivity to a given drug based on genomic signatures versus based on a multimodal signature. And we could see a dramatic increase in 10 out of 12 drugs in terms of predicting sensitivity to those drugs when using a multimodal model as opposed to genomics alone. So all of these kind of thoughts led us to this idea, along with the observation that when we do look at methylation classification, which is very quickly becoming a powerful tool in the hands of pathologists, that not every tumor type clusters based on methylation data alone, and in many cases tumors cluster together based on methylation where they actually have disparate fusions or mutations, and oftentimes those are targetable mutations or fusions. And so methylation classification alone, although very, very powerful, is not necessarily the end-all be-all. And so could we improve upon that with multimodal clustering? We chose medulloblastoma because we wanted to start with a cohort that has pretty good understanding of the methylation and that has known molecular subtypes that really are recapitulated in the methylation data layer. But there are still those tumors that have poor confidence scores when you cluster them. So there's a group 3, group 4, distinct on methylation, but there is maybe about 10% of them that have, they're sort of sit in between there. And group 3, group 4 medullos don't really have signature mutations per se, high incidence mutations. So consequently, we thought this would be a good cohort, pretty well defined. Let's start there and see what we can come up with. So we then basically looked at 5 data layers. Yes, Ash?
But I'm just curious.
We's generic. Yeah, so no, that's a good point. That's a good point. So this is
that table down that, no.
So this is leveraging, you know, all of CBTN data, right? So this is kind of saying like, okay, we've got all these data layers and we keep trumpeting how important it is to have this depth of biological understanding about our patients. And so it's basically saying, okay, on the diagnostic side of things, can we leverage having all of this data to better understand and categorize patients like another patient? With the general long-term idea being, can you choose drug vulnerabilities based upon this? Could you take the next patient, place them in the universe of patients and say, hey, you're most like all these others and they did X in response to Y? And so at some point, does this become a clinical decision support tool? In terms of the we, this is Adam Crea and his group at D3B, leveraging CBTN data. Yeah. So 5 data layers went into this: single nucleotide variants, so mutations, copy number variations, so changes in copy number, chromosomal copy number, epigenetics, that's your methylation, splice alterations, and the transcriptome, so gene transcriptional abundance. And using matrix factorization, incorporating a tool called int-NMF, incorporating all of those data layers into a clustering, a hierarchical clustering algorithm to try and pull these things apart into informative groups. And so what this yielded was 13 multiomic clusters. There was like basically one group 3 that didn't cluster with anybody. And if you look at the silhouette scores kind of down there, the more square they look, the more rectangular they look, as you can tell how bioinformatically, smart I am here. So the more square and rectangular they look, the better the fit. And so for a lot of these, that's actually a pretty impressive group of silhouette scores for such a varied group of data. And then if we look at those clusters, the scatter plots on the upper right, it sort of makes the point that different data layers do a better job than others clustering specific types of tumors. So in one data layer, you might see cases of different colors kind of overlaying one another. But if you look in a different data layer, and we've circled where they kind of get pulled apart in a different data layer. So just kind of a visual way to show that there is varying ability of these data layers to distinguish particular cases. And so this is what happens when we look at those 12 clusters, 13 clusters in comparison to the methylation alone. So on the left-hand side is the methylation-based 4, kind of the canonical 4 subgroups of medulloblastoma and how they break apart. You'll see that some are completely, faithful. So like the WNTs up on the top are completely faithful. They fall into this one cluster. Others, on the other hand, are more heterogeneous and they get pulled apart into different clusters. The next Sankey plot over on the right, these are the subtypes. So the Northcott group and others have looked at the methylation data in a deeper way to pull apart the subgroups into subtypes. And they do have varying clinical characteristics in terms of survival, age of incidence, things like that. So these really are real entities. And again, you can see that in some cases, our novel clusters are pretty faithful to those subtypes, and others, they don't. They get pulled apart into difference. And so as we sort of mentioned before, you want to sort of map this onto something of real-world significance, such as survival, and so that's what we did here. So major caveat here is that we applied the methylation only for subgroup and then all the subtype models to the same cohort of patients that we have. So that's, tying one hand behind their back. But just to try and do a comparison of like cohort, with the 4 subtype model, we did not have enough statistical power to actually differentiate outcome. In the subtype model, we could now with a pretty good p-value, but the multiomic model outperformed both of those. So again, in a small cohort, this seemed to be doing something real. So then we started looking, okay, so group 3 tumors. Group 3s, they have a pretty poor survival. As I mentioned before, they do not really have high incidence mutations, nothing targetable. We're a bit in the woods as to how to treat them differently. While we do have some tumors that we're starting to treat based on their subgroup, these we really don't have a lot of ideas. Now, in our new multiomic clustering, we basically were able to pull those apart into 2 clusters, one that has near perfect survival and the other that has an extremely poor 20% survival. And so that's really kind of intriguing, particularly since we're talking about small numbers here, 9 tumors in one group and 16 in the other, and would start to make one think about, hey, if we had, the idea of intensifying therapy versus de-intensifying, like this may be a way to predict which patients would be better served in different strategies. Similarly, with group 4, again, group 4, they do not have real important drivers that are targetable. And in this case, there's 4 different subgroups, 2 that have really excellent survival and 2 that have much more modest survival. And we can drill down, but in the interest of time, I won't really go into the right-hand side, but basically looking what are those determinative features of these different clusters. Pathways can be derived, correlated features that are predictive of cluster membership can be pulled out to try and get a sense of what's the biology of these clusters. And then the idea of like, okay, we want to really get to like clinical decision-making support, but it is not feasible to do all of these omic data layers for every single patient in a clinically actionable timeline. Consequently, is there a way that we can predict cluster membership based on some kind of a data modality that is much more accessible to patients? And so that gets to pathology, so pathomics, an H&E slide, and radiomics, so MRIs. And we've seen quite a lot over the last couple of days about how one can extract digital data from those modalities to try and create signatures. And so that's what Adam's group tried to do here, is basically derive features from MRI images, and this was done with Ariana's help. I think she's here somewhere. And then the pathomics derived features from there. So our limited sample cohort got even more limited because now we needed to have patients for whom we had both MRIs and H&Es and all the multiomic data. So this next bit is really just a tease, but we'll really benefit from an expansion of this cohort, which will happen for sure. And so this is basically the way that Adam had to go about it, given the limited sample size, is to divide the subgroups into kind of quartiles of outcome. So the best surviving subgroups in the top quartile and the lowest in the bottom quartile, and then compare with a Cox regression the features that would predict membership in one of these quartiles. And in doing that, again, using about 130 pathomic features and 520 radiomic features, this is sort of the outcome. So this is the pathomic features. These plots, you can look at the area under the curve as kind of a measure of predictive power, if you will. And for the high risk and intermediate high risk, they perform relatively well with an area under the curve of about 0.8. It started to get a little less great down in the low risk cases, but kind of did tantalize us in the sense that perhaps this will improve as we expand. The other thing that we're going to do here is to look specifically at group 3s. When we have more numbers and really it comes down to, hey, can you say, are you in cluster 9 or cluster 10? That's a simpler question to answer, and hopefully the features will predict that. And then this is based on the MRI features. And so again, with the high-risk clusters, it did a pretty good job of an area under the curve of about 0.8, and not as well in the lower risk. So trying to, again, bring this back to a clinically actionable space. So in the future, we're going to basically expand our cohorts. And then the other thing we'll do is combine those imaging features and pathomic features, because most patients have both, and we may be able to get more power out of doing it that way as well. And then, basically predicting drug vulnerabilities is kind of the last kind of holy grail in a sense. If we could not only say, hey, you belong in this cluster, but that cluster would be predicted to respond to this, and here's the preclinical evidence for it. Getting to some of the things that Carl is doing with the tumoroids, as well as Ron and his things kind of knit all this stuff together, which is the power of CBTN after all. All right, and with that, I would thank Adam Crea and his group for doing all this work. And it's been a real pleasure to work with them. Any questions I can attempt to answer?
Better than Grace.
Better than Grace. All right, I'll take it. If there are none, mercifully, thank you, I want to ask Amanda Haddock to come up and close us out. Amanda, as we know, is the founder and executive director of the Dragon Master Foundation. And I've told this to this audience before, but Amanda came to us years and years ago saying, why is there not data that everyone shares? Like, this is not how is this not a thing? And here we are, and she's helped us realize that dream. So thank you, Amanda.
Sorry, I have a quick question to ask. So I'm Amanda Haddock. I've talked a bunch, so most of you have probably heard my voice already by now. But we started Dragon Master Initiative right after my son passed away from what they were calling at the time glioblastoma, but now would probably be DMG, which just really goes to point out how much we've learned since he passed away in 2012. And I think it's really a credit to the very passionate people in this room. So I really have to start out by thanking all of you for just leaning in, especially over these last couple of days. It's really clear to me that there's a lot of passion in the room, and I appreciate the way that you all bring your unique experiences to this work. I know that each of you have a very personal reason for doing this, and for me, it's honoring my son and what he wanted us to do and what he had asked us to do. So in a very real way, this is fulfilling his wishes, and I really appreciate that from all of you. So I thought I was following Ken, like on the heels of Ken. So this is not to ignore the wonderful presentation that Brian just gave, but it mentions Ken a little bit. So it's very fitting that we did hear from Ken, because 2 years ago, we were in this meeting at CHOP with Ash and Ken and this wonderful team of people who I felt like kind of for the first time dug deep on, because we had been in Amazon's cloud for a while, right? CBTN has been using Amazon's cloud for a long time. And it was like we couldn't get anybody to pay attention to this amazing work that was going on. And they finally did. And so from those meetings and discussions, we've made just so much progress over the last couple of years. And that circle of support has just expanded to people like Josh and Brazita and Steve, and just so many Amazonians that I honestly can't name them all, but we're going to try, maybe not right now. I think we're going to do something tomorrow to get into a little bit more detail. But suffice it to say that we're very grateful for AWS for directing their attention and their resources to help not just these kids, right, but really to help improve healthcare research overall, because I think that's where we're heading with all of these tools. And everyone in this room has really played a role in getting us to today. The corporate partners with their solutions and looking at those in a new way and helping to put them to use on behalf of children with brain tumors, large government agencies like the NIH and the NCI and now ARPA-H, so thankfully, who've brought their areas of expertise together, right? They're really looking at new ways to work together to innovate and serve patients in ways that they've never really done before. The nonprofits and families that are in this room have provided funding that has made sure that the voice of the patient was present, a really central component for all of this. And of course, the research and healthcare professionals that have dedicated their long hours to build systems, develop solutions, and care for today's patients in ways that not only are going to serve those patients, but really build out better solutions for all patients to come. And so over these last couple of days, we've gathered a lot of inspiration, and we can harness that energy, hopefully, to fuel some groundbreaking discoveries. And this group has assembled around a problem that the rest of the world has really viewed as nearly impossible. I mean, you've all heard families stand up here and say that they were sent home with no hope, right? Go home, make memories. We've all heard that. That's not a thing, I think, that people in this room are saying anymore. There's still clinicians out there saying it, but they're not in this room. And in this room, I really feel like we've got a lot of visionaries. And I'm a pretty big fan of another visionary, Walt Disney. And he was quoted as saying, it's kind of fun to do the impossible. And I think that's what we're doing, right? People thought this was not something we could do. And I'm really sure that we are going to do that. So as we leave, and as some are leaving today and some are leaving tomorrow, but I just want everyone to go back to their workplace with that kind of vision to see the possibilities and not the problems. And so in the spirit of that, we wanted to give out an award today. We hope to present this award annually to a person who really exemplifies the spirit of the Children's Brain Tumor Network. It's sponsored by Dragon Master Initiative, and we were inspired to start it in honor of Jean Slaughter Matsuk, who just happens to be Jenna Lily's mom. Jean was a very staunch supporter of CBTN, and even through her own cancer battle, she never wavered in her dedication to research for children. Which, can I just say, like, that's a tough thing, right? If you're an adult with cancer, to not focus on like trying to do research for yourself, but to still, and I've met a few other adults like that as well, but it's rare, to put that level of selflessness out into the world is a really special thing. A friend described Jean as a beautiful spirit who shined brightly on everyone that she met. And indeed, her nickname was Sunny. So we're going to call this award the Sunny Award. And it's to remind us that her legacy of support will continue to shine brightly. Now, for who is going to get the award? Okay, so this award is given to a person who embraces innovation, fosters collaborations outside of their institution, and puts patients first, which is what we see as the true spirit of CBTN. And I want to pause here and say that to us, this award could go to literally anybody in this room, right? It's not for a doctor or, a bench scientist, or what did you call yourself earlier? A basic scientist? I was like, is there anything basic about Java? I don't think so. But like it could be support staff. It's really more about like the spirit of how you do what you do than what your job title is. So this year's awardee embodies all of those things and really just so much more. He's always an active participant in these meetings, and he's always looking for ways to improve processes and volunteering to work on projects that would just benefit everyone. And I know that his colleagues hold him in the highest esteem, but so do the families that he's worked with. And so I have a story from a patient family that kind of sums it all up nicely. They always felt that he was an advocate for them as their child went through treatment, and he really took the time to get to know them and their daughter, Emily. Emily had always looked forward to getting her port out and keeping it, but unfortunately, she passed away. And right after Emily died, her mom had a panicked moment because she remembered that, and she was like, oh my gosh, we didn't get Emily's port out. So she wanted to see if they could still save the port. So she called him, and he not only arranged to get that port for them, but he also went out and bought a pair of Crocs, which is Emily's favorite shoes, just so that he could get a Crocs bag so that he could make the delivery in a Crocs bag. He also put the port into a little butterfly container that Child Life had found, and he added her last courage bead and then took it to their home so that they wouldn't have to go back to the hospital so closely after she had passed just to pick that up. I think we can all agree that that shows a great deal of empathy and compassion. And I am so beyond proud to be able to recognize Jeff Stevens, who obviously recognized the story was about him long before everyone else did.
This is a beautiful award, and I'm so honored. I just want to thank everybody who's supported these efforts for these families. Emily was so special to me, and I know we all have those in our lives. So thank you all for your hard work in supporting these efforts. I'm just so delighted to work with all of you, and I hope to do so into the future. Thank you.
Okay, so just a reminder that we really hope that throughout the year, people will reach out with nominees for this award. We just kind of chose who we thought was best this year, but now that you know about it, please do feel free to reach out and put some nominees forward. And in closing, I just wanted to urge all of you to just really carry forth the inspiration from this meeting with you as you go back to your institutions and really fuel that flame of innovation and collaboration as we strive for research breakthroughs that can transform the landscape of brain cancer treatment. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of countless children and families.
Brian wants to tell you, thank you all for coming here. It was a great interactive session. Thank you, AWS, and the operations people, of course, you guys did great. Thank you, families who supported this event, and the CBTN, everyone. This was great. I suggest to have the next one here in Washington, D.C. as well, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. And our sponsors, thank you so much. We've listed them many times, and yeah, it was amazing how this all came together. Quite honestly, we came here and did a site tour. When was that? April or something like that. And Ash and your team have just really come together and made this a wonderful experience. And so, thank you so much for everything that was done by so many people behind the scenes that made this such a special event. And thank you all for attending. And we look forward to next year.